The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in a case that could redefine the limits of presidential power. At issue was the authority to impose broad tariffs without congressional approval, based on a national emergency law. President Donald Trump called this a life-or-death case. The outcome will have a direct impact on the economy and the reach of the executive branch. The justices questioned whether the White House can use a law created after the Watergate scandal in 1976 to justify tariffs that the law itself does not mention. The backdrop is the so-called big issue doctrine. When a measure has enormous political or economic weight, the rule is to go through Congress. The government's defense argues that the trade deficit is an emergency. Opponents respond, emergency is not a shortcut to circumvent the legislature. Important signals came from the questions. Justice Neil Gorsuch drew attention to the practical difficulty of Congress reversing powers already exercised by the president, noting that a two-thirds majority in both houses would be needed to override a veto. In her words, there is a real-world challenge to undoing a broad presidential act. Justice Amy Coney Barrett targeted the concrete effects. If tariffs fall, who pays the bill for the reimbursements? She called the current design a mess. There is also an institutional history. The National Emergencies Act initially provided that Congress could end emergencies with a joint resolution. In 1983, the Supreme Court overturned this legislative veto mechanism. Since then, emergencies can be prolonged. This context weighs on the assessment of the limits of the executive's power. Politically, tariffs have been central to Donald Trump's agenda for decades. In 1988, he was already advocating for higher tariffs from trading allies. In government, tariffs have become an instrument of foreign policy and negotiation. Within the Republican Party itself, there are voices that privately fear the economic costs of harsh measures and see the court's decision as a possible relief for businesses and consumers. Legally, the case is not about whether tariffs are always prohibited. The point is what path the law allows. There are other statutes that authorize tariffs, with stricter criteria and procedures. If the court validates the broad use of the emergency law, these paths may become secondary. If it blocks it, it reaffirms that the executive needs specific authorization when dealing with issues of great economic importance. The effects go beyond trade. How the Supreme Court interprets the combination of emergency and presidential power will serve as a reference for disputes over independent agencies, funds approved by Congress, and other executive orders. In the last 9 months, the court has dealt with issues related to the president in quick and provisional decisions. Now, for the first time in this cycle, it is analyzing the merits of a central instrument of government.